I stood in my kitchen holding a can of soup and something felt off. Not because I couldn't open it. I've opened thousands of cans in my life, but because I didn't even want to try. That's the part that scared me. It wasn't pain. It wasn't dizziness. It wasn't anything dramatic you'd rush to the hospital for. It was something quieter, heavier, like my body had already decided it was done for the day before I even started. I remember just standing there staring at that can thinking, what is wrong with me? And then doing what most of us do. I made an excuse. Well, I'm 94. This is probably normal. That sentence will cost you more than you think. Because once you say that, you stop asking questions. You stop paying attention. You stop fighting back. I set the can down and leaned against the counter longer than I needed to. My legs weren't shaking. My hands weren't weak. But everything felt slow, like I was moving through wet cement. And here's the strange part. If you looked at me, you wouldn't think anything was wrong. I was still walking, still driving short distances, still going to church on Sundays, still answering the phone like everything was fine. But inside something had changed. Simple things started to feel optional. Making lunch. Maybe later. Folding laundry. It can wait. Taking a short walk. Not today. It wasn't laziness. I've never been lazy a day in my life. I raised a family. I worked. I took care of a home. I didn't suddenly turn into someone who avoids effort. This was different. It felt like my body was quietly negotiating with me and winning. Skip it today. Do it tomorrow. You've done enough. And I listened. That morning I ended up eating crackers instead of that soup. Not because I preferred it. Because it was easier. That should have been my first real warning. Not the tired feeling, not the slow movements. But the moment I started choosing the easier option, even when I knew it wasn't the better one. But I didn't see it that way. I told myself I was just being practical. At 94, you learn to conserve energy right. That's what I believed. And the truth is, nothing about that morning looked like a medical problem. There was no dramatic symptom, no clear sign pointing to anything specific. Just a quiet, steady kind of tired that didn't go away. The kind you sleep on and wake up with again. I kept thinking, maybe I just didn't sleep well, or maybe I'm coming down with something. Or the classic one, this is just what getting old feels like. That one is dangerous because it sounds reasonable. It sounds experienced. It sounds like something a person my age would say. But it can also be wrong. I didn't realize it then, but that feeling, that constant low-level fatigue that never really left, wasn't just part of aging. It was a signal, and I ignored it. Not once, not twice. I ignored it over and over again until it became my new normal. And when something becomes your normal, you stop seeing it as a problem. You just live around it. That's exactly what I did. I reached for another sleeve of crackers instead of cooking anything real. That wasn't new. That had been happening for years, just not all at once. After my husband passed, the kitchen got quiet. Not physically quiet, it always is, but different. There was no reason to cook a full meal anymore. No one asking what's for dinner. No one sitting across from me. At first, I tried to keep things normal. I'd make a pot of something, eat it for a few days. But even that started to feel like too much work for just one person. So I adjusted. That's the word I used. Adjusted. I started buying things that didn't need effort. Frozen dinners, canned soup, bread lunch meets cereal. The kind of food you don't have to think about. You open it, you heat it. You're done. And honestly, it felt efficient. I told myself I was being practical. Why spend an hour cooking when I could be done in 5 minutes? So my day started to look like this. Morning coffee and maybe a piece of toast if I remembered. Lunch sometimes, a sandwich, sometimes nothing. Dinner, whatever was easiest to heat up while watching TV. No schedule, no real meals, just eating whenever it felt convenient. And the strange thing is nothing bad happened right away. I didn't get sick. I didn't lose weight dramatically. I didn't feel like I was doing anything wrong. That's how it creeps in. You don't notice the change because it doesn't hit you all at once. It's slow, quiet, almost polite. I stopped buying fresh food as much. Vegetables would go bad before I used them. Fruit didn't seem worth it unless I was really in the mood, so I leaned more into what lasted longer, what was easier. And over time, I stopped thinking about food as something that fuels you and started treating it like something you just get out of the way. That's a dangerous shift. Because when you stop paying attention to what you're putting in your body still pays attention. I just wasn't listening. If you had asked me back then, I would have said I was eating fine. Not perfect, but fine. I wasn't starving. I wasn't overeating. But I also wasn't giving my body much to work with. No real variety. Not much fresh anything. A lot of things that come in boxes, cans, or plastic trays. And I didn't question it. Because again, nothing was obviously wrong. I could still do my daily routine. I could still drive to the store. I could still have conversations and go about my life. So in my mind, everything checked out. That's the part people miss. You don't have to feel terrible for something to be off. You just have to slowly drift far enough from what your body actually needs. And I had drifted without realizing how far. Looking back now, it wasn't one bad decision. It was a long string of small, easy ones that all made sense at the time. And they added up in a way I didn't notice until much later. By then, my body had already been trying to tell me something for a while. I rubbed my calf one night because it tightened up for no reason. It wasn't painful enough to worry about, just annoying. The kind of thing you stretch out and forget 5 minutes later. So I did exactly that. A few days later, it happened again. Different leg this time, same story. I stretched, walked it off, moved on. I didn't connect anything. Why would I? People my age get cramps. That's not exactly breaking news. Then there were the nights. I'd lie in bed ready to fall asleep and suddenly feel my heart thump a little harder than usual. Not fast, not racing, just heavier, like it was reminding me it was there. I'd shift positions, take a breath, wait it out. It's probably nothing. That became my answer for everything. My ankles looked a little swollen some evenings. Too much salt. I'd get up in the middle of the night more often. That's just age. Sometimes my hands felt slightly numb after sitting too long. Circulation. I had an explanation ready every single time. And every explanation sounded reasonable. That's the problem with slow changes. They give you just enough logic to ignore them. None of these things were strong enough on their own to feel serious. If one symptom had hit me hard all at once, I might have paid attention. But this wasn't loud. It was scattered, Little things, here and there, easy to brush off, and I brushed them off. What I didn't brush off, what I couldn't shake, was the tiredness. That stayed, not the kind where you say I need a nap and feel better after. This was different. I could sleep a full night and still wake up feeling like I hadn't rested at all. I'd sit down mid-morning and already feel like I'd done enough for the day, and yet I kept finding ways to explain that too. Maybe I didn't sleep well. Maybe I'm just slowing down. Maybe this is what 94 feels like. I said that one a lot. It's a convenient answer. It closes the case. No more questions, no need to look deeper. But something didn't sit right, because this wasn't a sudden change. It wasn't like I woke up one day and everything felt harder. It was gradual. So gradual I couldn't point to when it started. Only that it was there, all the time. I remember sitting in my living room one afternoon, remote in my hand, staring at the TV, without really watching anything. Not because I was interested, but because it was easier than doing anything else. And I caught myself thinking, I shouldn't feel this tired doing nothing. That thought passed quickly. I stood up, walked to the kitchen, grabbed something small to eat, and kept going with my day like I always did. Because that's what you do when nothing feels serious enough to stop you. You adjust. You slow down. You work around it. And if you can still get through the day, you convince yourself it's fine, even when it's not. I bent down to pick up the remote and stopped halfway, not because I couldn't reach it. It was right there on the floor. But something in me hesitated. A thought I didn't expect showed up. What if I can't get back up? That had never crossed my mind before. I've dropped things my whole life. You pick them up, you move on. No big deal. But this time, I stayed there for a second longer than I should have, just thinking about it. I looked around like someone might be watching. Nobody was, just me and a remote on the floor. And suddenly that felt like a bigger situation than it should have been. I slowly lowered myself the rest of the way, picked it up and stood back up carefully. Nothing happened. No pain. No dizziness. I was fine. But the feeling didn't go away. It stayed with me. That quiet doubt. Later that day, I found myself moving differently. Not slower exactly, just more cautious. Like I was testing every step before I took it. I noticed it when I reached for something on a shelf. I noticed it when I got up from the couch. I noticed it when I walked down the hallway at night. Everything had a second of hesitation attached to it, and that's when it hit me. I didn't trust my body the way I used to. That's a strange thing to admit at my age. You expect some changes. You expect to slow down a bit. But this wasn't about speed. This was about confidence. I wasn't sure anymore, not sure if I had the energy, not sure if I had the strength, not sure if something simple would stay simple. So I started avoiding things. Nothing dramatic, just small decisions. I'd leave something on the floor and get it later. I'd sit a little longer before getting up. I'd skip tasks that felt like they might take more out of me than I wanted to give. And again, I had reasons for all of it. I'll do it tomorrow. It's not that important. I don't need to push myself. All of those sound responsible, sensible even. But there's a fine line between being careful and quietly giving things up. I didn't see that line at the time. I just knew I didn't feel as steady as I used to. That night I sat on the edge of my bed longer than usual before lying down. Not because I was tired, but because I was thinking, trying to figure out when this started, and the honest answer was I didn't know. There wasn't a moment I could point to. No fall, no illness, no event that explained it. Just a slow shift from I can do this to maybe I shouldn't. And once that thought shows up, it's hard to ignore. So I did something I don't usually do. I picked up the phone and called my daughter. Not because I needed help with anything specific, but because for the first time I wasn't entirely sure I had everything under control anymore. I sat in that exam room, tapping my fingers on my knee, waiting for someone to tell me what was wrong, not hoping for anything serious, just something clear, something I could point to and say, "That's it. That's the problem." My daughter insisted on the appointment. I probably would have kept putting it off if she hadn't. They ran the usual tests: blood work, blood pressure, the standard routine. Nothing dramatic. Nobody rushed in with urgent news. The doctor came back in, looked at the chart, and said something that caught me off guard. "Well, overall, you're doing okay." Okay. That word didn't match how I felt. I nodded anyway. Then why do I feel like this? He didn't jump to an answer, just asked a few more questions. What do you eat in a typical day? How much water do you drink? Do you cook often? Simple questions. I gave simple answers. Coffee in the morning, something quick for lunch, dinner, whatever's easy. Water not as much as I probably should. He didn't react like I expected. No lecture, no long explanation. He just leaned back a little and said, "At your age, it's often not one big thing that causes this." I waited. It's what's missing day after day. That was it. No complicated diagnosis. No dramatic explanation, just that one line. I didn't like it because it didn't give me something to fix immediately. It didn't give me a name for what I was feeling. It didn't feel like an answer, but it stayed with me. What's missing? I went home that afternoon and sat at my kitchen table longer than usual. The same table where I'd been eating quick meals for years. I looked around the kitchen. Really looked this time. Cabinets full of things that last a long time. Boxes, cans, frozen meals stacked neatly. Nothing wrong with any of it on its own. But put together day after day, it told a different story. I tried to replay my meals in my head. What did I actually eat this week? Not in detail, just generally. And the answer was not much variety, not much real food, not much of anything my body could actually use for long. I didn't think of it that way before. Food was just food. As long as I wasn't hungry, I assumed I was fine. But sitting there, I started to realize something uncomfortable. I had been feeding myself just enough to get by, not enough to stay strong. That's a different standard, and nobody tells you exactly when you cross that line. There wasn't a moment where my body sent up a big red flag saying, "You're missing something important." Instead, it just kept going. Adjusting, slowing down, working with less. And I kept living like nothing had changed. The doctor didn't say the word potassium. He didn't hand me a list or tell me to overhaul my life. He just pointed me in a direction. And for the first time, I had to admit something I hadn't said out loud before. Maybe nothing was wrong with me. Maybe I had just been running on less than I needed for a very long time. I opened my fridge and just stood there staring at what I had been calling food. A half-used loaf of bread, a few slices of deli meat, butter, a carton of eggs I hadn't touched in a week, and a freezer full of dinners that all looked different on the box, but tasted exactly the same. It hit me in a way that wasn't dramatic, just honest. I had made my life easier, and in the process I had made my body work harder. I closed the fridge and leaned against the counter, thinking about what the doctor said. What's missing? Not what's broken, not what's wrong. What's missing, that's a different kind of problem. You don't feel it right away. You don't notice it in a single day. But over time, it shows up everywhere, in your energy, in your strength, in how steady you feel doing simple things. I started connecting pieces I had never put together before. The constant fatigue, the cramps, the way my heart felt heavier at night, the hesitation when I moved. None of those things felt related when they were happening. But now they looked like they belonged to the same story. Not a sudden illness, a slow shortage. And that's when a thought crossed my mind that I didn't like. What if I did this to myself, not intentionally, not out of neglect, just slowly, over years of choosing what was easy instead of what was needed? I didn't want that to be true. It's easier to accept something happening to you than something building because of you. But the more I looked at my habits, the harder it was to ignore. I wasn't eating foods that actually supported my body, not consistently, not in any real way. I wasn't giving it enough of what it needed to keep everything working the way it should. And I had been ignoring the signs the whole time, not because I didn't care, because I kept explaining them away. That's the part that sticks with me. I didn't miss the signs because they were hidden. I missed them because I didn't treat them like they mattered. I had turned fatigue into something normal. I had turned discomfort into something expected. I had turned small warnings into background noise. And once you do that, you stop responding. You adapt. You live around the problem instead of fixing it. I thought about that moment in the kitchen with the soup can. The hesitation, the lack of energy to even try. That wasn't random. That was the result of something building for a long time. And for the first time I saw it clearly. I hadn't suddenly become weak. I had slowly run out of what kept me going. And the worst part wasn't that it happened. It's that I saw pieces of it along the way and chose not to take them seriously. I picked up a couple of potatoes at the store and almost talked myself out of it. They felt like work. That's how far I had drifted. Real food started to feel like effort, and effort felt like something I should avoid. But I bought them anyway. Nothing fancy, no big plan. I didn't come home and suddenly become a different person. I just did one simple thing. I baked a potato. That was it. No recipe, no schedule, no promise that I'd stick with anything. Just one real meal that didn't come from a box, and to be honest, the first few days didn't feel any different. I was still tired, still slow in the morning, still wondering if any of this would even matter, so I kept it simple. Potatoes, beans, a few greens when I remembered. I started drinking more water, not because someone told me to, but because I realized I hadn't been. That was the entire plan, and I didn't do it perfectly. Some nights I went right back to cereal. Some days I didn't feel like cooking anything at all. Old habits don't just disappear because you decide they should. They wait. They're convenient, they're familiar, and when you're tired, they're easy to fall back into. And I did, more than once. But something small started to shift. Not in a dramatic way, no sudden burst of energy, no moment where I said, I'm back. It was quieter than that. I noticed one morning I didn't feel quite as heavy getting out of bed. Another day I made it through the afternoon without needing to sit down as much. It wasn't impressive, but it was different, so I paid attention. Weeks went by like that, small changes, easy choices when I could manage them. No pressure to be perfect. And then one night, I had one of those moments again. I was lying in bed, and my heart started to feel that same heavy thump I used to ignore. For a second, I froze. Not out of fear, out of recognition, because I knew exactly what it was. Earlier that day, I hadn't eaten anything real. Just quick food, easy food, the kind I had relied on for years. And there it was again, not random, not mysterious, connected. That was the moment things became clear in a way they hadn't before. This wasn't in my head. This wasn't just getting old. My body was responding to what I was giving it or not giving it. And for the first time, I understood that I didn't need to overhaul my life to change how I felt. I just needed to stop pretending the small things didn't matter. I sat down at my kitchen table with a simple meal and realized I hadn't actually been paying attention for a long time. Not to my body, not to what I was eating, not to how I felt day after day. I had been getting through my days, not really living them. And that's the part nobody tells you about getting older. It's not just about what your body can't do anymore. It's about what you slowly stop noticing. I knew better. That's what bothered me. I grew up in a time when meals mattered. Real food at regular times. You didn't skip around. You didn't just eat whatever was easiest all the time. Somewhere along the way, I decided those rules didn't apply anymore. Not because I disagreed with them, because I got comfortable. Comfort is quiet. It doesn't feel like a mistake. It feels like relief, like you've earned the right to take it easy. But your body doesn't see it that way. Your body keeps track. And if you slowly start giving it less nutrients, less water, less consistency, it adjusts for a while. Then it starts sending signals, not loud ones, not emergencies, just small things, feeling more tired than usual, needing to sit down sooner, losing the energy to do things you used to do without thinking. The problem is those signals are easy to ignore. I ignored them because they made sense in my head. I'm older. I don't need as much. I'm just slowing down. Those all sound reasonable. That's what makes them dangerous. Because once you believe that, you stop asking if something else might be going on. I'm not saying every problem has a simple answer. It doesn't. But I am saying this. Don't be too quick to blame your age for something your habits might be causing. That's a mistake I made. I didn't need a complicated solution. I didn't need a specialist or a major treatment plan. I needed to stop ignoring the obvious. I needed to look at how I was living honestly and admit that I wasn't giving my body what it needed anymore. And once I saw that, clearly something changed. Not overnight, not dramatically. But I stopped making excuses. That's where it starts. You don't fix everything at once. You just stop pretending nothing needs to be fixed, and that alone can take you further than you think. I rinsed a few beans in the sink and caught myself smiling like I'd just done something impressive. That's how low the bar had gotten. And honestly, that's exactly where it needed to be. Because what actually worked for me wasn't some big plan. It wasn't a strict diet or a list taped to the fridge or a promise to do better starting Monday. It was small, repeatable things that didn't feel like a chore. I stopped trying to fix everything and focused on what I could do that day. Something real to eat, a glass of water before I forgot. Sitting down and actually finishing a meal instead of picking at it. That was the system. Not exciting, not impressive, but it worked. And I'll tell you something you don't hear often enough. Most of the advice out there is too complicated for real life, especially at my age. I don't need 10 steps. I don't need a morning routine that takes an hour. I don't need to track every little thing. I need things that fit into a normal day. So I kept it simple. If I hadn't eaten anything real, I made sure I did. If I hadn't had enough water, I fixed that. If I felt myself slipping back into old habits, I corrected it sooner instead of later. That last one matters more than people think, because you will slip. I did. There were days I went right back to cereal for dinner. Days I didn't feel like cooking anything at all. Days where the easiest option won. That didn't mean I failed. It just meant I had a choice the next day. And instead of letting one off day turn into a week or a month, I reset right away. That's the difference. Not perfection, not discipline, just not staying off track for too long. Over time, those small choices started to add up. I wasn't dragging myself through the morning anymore. I wasn't avoiding simple tasks. I wasn't sitting down every hour just to catch my breath. And maybe most importantly, I stopped second-guessing my body. I moved without that hesitation. I bent down without wondering if I'd regret it. I stood up without thinking twice. Nothing dramatic changed, but everything felt easier. And that's how you know something is working. Not because you suddenly feel amazing, but because things stop feeling so hard. I used to think I needed more energy to fix my routine. Turns out I needed a better routine to get my energy back. And once that clicked, I stopped looking for complicated answers. Because my body wasn't asking for anything complicated in the first place. I sat back in my chair one evening, finished a simple meal, and noticed something I hadn't felt in a long time. Nothing felt heavy, not my legs, not my chest, not even my thoughts. And it hit me. This wasn't about getting younger. I'm still 94. I still move slower than I used to. I still have days where I don't feel like doing much. But I'm not dragging myself through the day anymore. That's the difference. For a long time, I thought I was just getting old, that everything I felt was part of the deal, and I accepted it without question. That was my mistake. If there's one thing I've learned, it's this. Don't be too quick to blame your age for something your habits might be causing. Your body doesn't usually fail all at once. It gives you chances, quiet ones, small signals, the kind that are easy to ignore if you're not paying attention. I ignored mine, not because I didn't care, because I kept telling myself I had a good reason. But good reasons don't fix real problems. Simple actions do. Eating something real, drinking enough water, keeping a routine even when you don't feel like it. None of that is exciting, but over time it changes how you feel more than anything complicated ever will. And here's something I wish I had understood sooner. You don't need to wait for things to get bad before you start taking care of yourself. If something feels off even a little, pay attention. Don't talk yourself out of it. Don't explain it away too quickly, because the longer you ignore it, the harder it is to come back from it. I didn't need a miracle. I didn't need a perfect plan. I just needed to stop ignoring what mattered. That's the kind of thing you only really understand after you've lived through it. The kind of insight that sounds simple until you realize how easy it is to overlook. If this story felt familiar or reminded you of someone you care about, then you already know why it matters. This channel is built on stories like this. Stories about life advice. Stories about advice from grandparents. Stories about life lessons that don't come from textbooks, but from real experience. If you want more of that honest, practical, no-nonsense wisdom, take a moment to subscribe to Old People Share, because sometimes the most important things we need to learn are the ones we almost ignored.